Hello, everyone. I'm Esabell, and we are here for Elizabethan Underwear. So, there is actually a PowerPoint. It is the most boring PowerPoint of my entire existence, but it exists. So I'm gonna quickly share my screen. And say you are at Easy Period Elizabethan Underwear or things to do with white linen. And we're gonna focus, so who actually made it? So unmute yourselves and say hi.
Hi!
Say who you are and where you live.
I'm the Honorable Lady Michelle of Harris upon York, and I reside in the Barony of Griffinslayer within Artemisia, and Esabell is my wonderful Laurel.
Hi, I'm Kristen Holscher, and I am in Antir, in Tacoma.
I'm Knut.
Welcome.
I'm with Arnhold.
I am Lady Christina de la Ganesa, and I am currently in the Barony of Calafia, formerly Barony of Arnhold.
I've lived in Calafia. All right. I think that's everyone. And we have Juliana, who is our fabulous host. So, getting started, there is a smock pattern maker, and it is a nice tool that Drea Lead put out. I may have used it a really long time ago, but I haven't done it very much. But this is the general shape of the thing that we're making. This general shape was used for about 1,000 years. The Vikings used this general shape for both male and female shirts. How you do the neckline and the shaping of the sleeves and exactly where the gores go seems to be the major difference. And as far as I can tell, where the gores go depends entirely upon your body. And they're seen in lots of different places in lots of different extant examples. So in as much as some people say there's a rule for where the gores go, I think they haven't done enough research. I think that the gores can go wherever fits, and that probably in real life, in real period, people put the gores where the gores needed to be in order for the item of clothing to be useful, because the gores serve a purpose. And we'll talk more about gores later. Right after you don't kill me when we talk about gussets. That was not the thing I wanted to do. So here are some examples of Elizabethan underwear, and of the types we're going to make. 3 of these are period, and 4 of these are period examples, and 1 of these is one that somebody made, but it's basically what we're doing, so I'm good with it. So this is the basic idea. Our goal is to make a pattern. So you will need a measuring tape, some crap fabric, some not crap thread, although the thread really doesn't need to be very good either, a sewing machine or a really quick running stitch, some pins, and possibly a really friendly friend. So I'm going to stop my, I'm going to stop my share real quick. And I'm going to say, I have my handy dandy measuring tape, and I am wearing a smock, but the measuring, you need to find your biggest place. And on me, my biggest place is pretty busty. And I got about 40, I'm gonna call yeah, I'll call it 40 inches. So I have 40 inches. Now, that's all the way around. And if I divide that in half, I get about 20 inches. 20 inches is not enough. So if I were to go over here and measure one of my smocks that I'm not wearing, it measures 22 inches across. So my suggestion, and in my PowerPoint and in my handout, if you got it, is divide by 2, add an inch. So if you want it looser, add more, don't add a whole lot. My smocks tend to be kind of baggy, so I added a couple of extras. So I wound up with I probably cut that at 45.5 inches to get my seam allowances. But in general, you take that measurement, you divide by 2, you add an inch. If you want a looser smock, add some more, but really don't add a huge amount, and cut a piece of fabric that wide, because we're making the pattern. Now the next question is, you know how wide it is, how long does it need to be? And that just depends. My favorite option is to not do a shoulder seam. There's lots of reasons why I hate shoulder seams, but I hate shoulder seams. In Period, there are examples of shirts and smocks that have shoulder seams and examples of shirts and smocks that don't have shoulder seams. This is another one of those cases of, in real life, they did it however it worked with their fabric and however it worked with their bodies. But the shoulder seam is always a point of tension. It's always a place where things rip out. If I never have to have a shoulder seam, I will never have a shoulder seam. So when I do this measurement, I think about how long I want my smock to be. I really like to show my skirts, so I like a long one. So mine don't quite go to the floor, but it goes past, all of them ought to go past your butt, because it's sort of the purpose. And I suppose I should go back and talk a little bit about the purpose of a smock. The purpose of these, oh, I love Zoom so much. Fine. The purpose of all Elizabethan underwear is to keep your body from your clothes. Their medical belief was that skin was very, very fine and sensitive, and it was very, very best to keep it from contact with other stuff. And because of that, they considered this layer of clothing their second skin. And like literally, they called it their second skin. And in calling it their second skin, they washed the second skin instead of the first skin. And they washed the second skin to remove the smells and the body oils and the stuff. And so your body linens got washed relatively often. And even very, very poor people probably had at least 2 body linens, one to be worn and one to be washed. Because it was apparently way easier to give your smock a bath than it was to give you a bath. And that's just how they ran things. So the point of this garment is to be close to your body, to protect all of the outer clothes from you, and because your outer clothes aren't going to get washed that often. Velvets, wools, all of those other fabrics that they were using to make their outer clothing might be a little less washable. Whereas the white linen, you just throw that in a pot of boiling water with some soap and stir and hang it up to dry, lay it out on the grass, let it bleach out to white. It's easy peasy and did its job. So anybody have any questions at this point? No.
Were smocks considered supportive in terms of bust usually, or was it just more of a second skin sort of situation?
So smock was a second skin. The kirtle was the supportive garment. So when I say that I'm usually just running around in my underwear, if I'm running around in a smock, a shirt, a kirtle, and a partlet, I am running around in my underwear. I have not put on any outerwear yet. And all of that is made of linen. All of that is considered washable. And the kirtle, the top of the kirtle acts as a supportive garment. And in some cases it was boned, in some other cases it wasn't boned, but in general it was meant to be that supportive garment. Anything else? Very good question. All right, so Christina, got your fabric? Got your measurement? You're muted. Oh, you're hiding. That's good. So Knut or Chris, are you going to do construction with us?
So somebody asked if there was a link to the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint, if that's what you sent to me, Isabel, there is a handout on the class info link. I'll post it here in a minute though.
All right, I can,
no worries, I'll post it. I'll post your handout here.
all right, the handout is something else,
Okay,
but the PowerPoint was built off of it, so yes. And at the moment, I'm trying to get it to let me unshare my screen, but it's being very difficult.
Well, you probably already know there's a red stop share.
Right now, that entire bar is not visible on my screen, so
Here we can do, I will share my screen.
I will turn on my other screen and see if by some chance it's hanging out over there.
And then I will stop my share. Now you've stopped sharing.
Oh, how awesome.
Now I have also stopped sharing.
Fabulous. And see, now I can see the chat. Knut's here for a while. Awesome. The handout is in the chat if you'd like it on a Google Drive. Woot! Fantabulous. Oh, and we have someone else. We have Nivette. All right. So for those of us who are doing our actual construction, my number was 20. I measured my other kirtle, and it's at 22 across. And I think that I'm gonna cut my fabric at 23, and that will give me a little bit of a seam allowance. So I have my linen.
Grace, how large of a seam allowance do you usually do on these? Half inch?
Fabulous question. So because this stuff is gonna it's gonna fray. So all of the seams have to be finished. And because all of the seams have to be finished, that means that I generally do between a 3/4 and a 5/8 and a 3/4 seam allowance on that first seam, because by the time I finish it, I'm gonna have to, everything gets flat felled. So we'll be trimming and then folding over and sewing down on all of the seams. So giving yourself a healthy seam allowance is a good thing. Now, if I can only find my scissors. Here's the great thing about linen. I don't need my scissors. I just rip. I'm gonna rip for a while because I like these guys long. Let's see, I have not ripped enough yet. Now I have ripped enough. And I found the scissors. I don't know what I just did, but that was wrong. That's more like it. All right, I have a body. Doesn't look like much yet, but it's a body. I'm gonna fold it in half, the long way, so front to back. Sweet, I has a body. All right, step 1 done. Step 2. We need sleeves. So, sleeves. Similar to body, sleeves have a lot of different formats. We're going simple. We're going simple, flat sleeve, no gathers. If you want gathers, you can gather. But it's we're looking for the simple for the beginner. So we're gonna do a sleeve. Again, we must measure. Find your bicep, which is usually the widest part of your arm. You need the widest part of your arm. My widest part of my arm seems to be about 14 inches. You can tell this is a little bit baggy, but not too baggy. You do not want super tight sleeves. Super tight sleeves will go badly for you. I promise. Linen is lovely and it will loosen and stretch, especially with the warmth of your body. You don't want super tight sleeves. Don't do it. Bad plan. All right, so my number was 14. I'm gonna, again, go measure an old smock just for reference. Oh, look, 7 inches. So my number should probably be 14 plus 1 plus 2. Depends on how wide I want my sleeves to go. I'm going to go with 16 so I have good seam allowance. And then my sleeve length. I like my sleeves a little long because I like my sleeves a little long. I can roll them up, so I keep them wide enough that I can roll them up. So measuring on me, shoulder, requires teeth or a friend. Still requires teeth or a friend. All right.
Really a case where social distancing is not helping us.
No, it's not. I have my elbow bent. And it's not the best measurement because I'm doing it on myself, but my elbow is bent. And I am 23.5 inches. So that means that I need 2 pieces of fabric that are about 15 by about 25. I'm always adding extra. I always add extra for seam allowance. And then in this case, I'm also going to need a hem. So I added 1.5 inches, can add 1.5 inches, 2 inches. You want to make sure that you have a long enough sleeve. And it's always better to have a little bit extra and then have to cut it off. So I said I was going to do 15 by 25. Hey, look, I have all this linen left over here.
Your Grace, do these sleeves taper at all, or is it just a straight line?
So the tapering is a good question. I always start with a rectangular sleeve, and then I taper it some. If you want to taper it from the beginning, make sure that you have your fabric on a fold. So for my 15.5, I would want 17.5, or for my 15, I'd want 17.5 on each side of my fold, and that you do it evenly, trying to taper the rectangle. So tapering the rectangle when you're sewing it together isn't hard. Tapering it by trying to cut 2 different pieces is fraught. I've never ever gotten it to taper nicely that way. So if you're going to cut the taper in the first place, you can. If you're going to do that, the measurement on the other end is bigger than you think it is. You want to make sure it can go all the way around the widest part of your hand, because the hand is going to have to go through. And one of the rookie mistakes is people measure their wrist and they taper the sleeve to their wrist measurement. And at that point, they have a lovely, can't get their hands out the other end sock. So for me, I could taper it down probably to no less than 9 inches. So going from, in that folded in half, from a 7.5 to a 4.5. The other thing you want to make sure you do if you taper is you want to leave the hand in the last, at the hand end, you want to leave the last inch or so not tapered, because it's really hard to taper, to hem a taper. You need to have that rectangle at the end that you can fold over to hem, because otherwise you wind up with a piece of your hem that just doesn't actually hem very well, because it's on an angle rather than on the straight. Does that make sense to everybody? Awesome. Anybody have any questions so far?
I'm not sure if you already answered this one. Chris H asked, what linen do you buy? Did that
I
already
have a
answer?
whole slide on that at the end.
Okay. But she's shopping now.
Well, the linen that I'm using today came from fabricstore.com. There's some William Booth Draper that I love. It's very nice linen if you are looking for some very nice linen.
There's also a new place out of Canada that they even make linen that is bed width, like 120 inches wide or something. I've gotten a bunch of their stuff now. I love it, and it's cheaper than linenstore.com or fabricstore.com, and it's 4 times as good. I'll find the link.
I was going to say, please share that link.
Yeah, share that link
Yeah,
now.
no kidding. Let's share that link.
Now, you are my apprentice. Go find that link. How have you not shared this with your good Laurel? Anyway. All right. So what did I say? 15 by 25? The other thing with the linen is you can iron it as many times as you want. It's never going to not be wrinkly. Just get over it. All right, so there's my 25. And I do just tear my linen. It works great. I wind up
you're going along the grain.
I'm going along the grain.
There's a good reason not to taper right there.
Yeah.
purelinenenvy.ca.
purelinenenvy.ca. Awesome. I shall be looking at their stuff.
All right, I put the link in the comments. It is purelinenenvy.ca. They are a Canadian company, but they are amazing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Speaking of things I'm putting in the comments, I'm also putting the sign-up sheet for this class in the comments. Feel free to go and, sign up and get credit.
Oh, Madalena says that she has had linen tear wonky not along the grain line. I have never had that happen. Occasionally I'll have it tear wonky where it will then decide to tear along a different grain line than the one that I had previously assigned it. But I've never had it just go wonk. All right, I have sleeves. So I have a body, I have sleeves. My body is folded in half. Folded in half. I have a place, and great thing about linen, if you tell it this is where I want you to fold, and you are at all serious about it, so I'm gonna go down to the very bottom and I'm gonna run my fingers up and see it's already gone wonky. All right, all the way up. And I'm gonna say this is the spot, and I'm going to crush it down like this, and it's gonna hold that forever. I'm all right with it. See, now I have a very sharp, very, very sharp fold right here. Now I need to do it on the other side. And I have to admit that before we started, I did tear a strip off of the bottom of the linen. So I know that we started on, that both sides are starting on the same grain line. All right, so I have these two nice solid folds in there. I'm gonna keep track of them over here. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with my sleeves. I'm gonna pick an end. It really doesn't matter which end. I'm gonna put the corners together and I'm going to make myself a tidy little fold. And I'm going to do that for my other sleeve. Match my corners, tidy little fold. And now I'm gonna put the folds together and I'm gonna sew them on. I hate pins. This is just putting it out there. I hate pins. I only use them if it's absolutely necessary. I find that linen is sticky enough that if I just put my folds together, and also it doesn't matter that much if I'm off by a millimeter or two, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. But I match it up. I'm gonna sew sleeve on. So I was talking to someone earlier today about doing this, and they're like, can you really get the whole thing done in a 2-hour class? I'm like, I've gotten the whole thing done in 45 minutes. I can't imagine why this is gonna take any longer.
Step 1, tear the heck out of your fabric. Done.
Yeah, and oh, plug in your, or make sure that your sewing machine is plugged in. Something went wonky. Huh. Turn on the sewing machine. I forget this thing has an on button. Now, if you want to do this by hand, a nice back stitch. And I'm leaving a fair bit unsewn at the end because I have more things to sew in here. And I left myself a pretty solid 3/4 of an inch gap. And if I need to fill in a hole later, I will fill in a hole later. It's fine. All right, other side, I still have my handy little foldy that I made. Of course, now I don't know which foldy it is. I think it's actually this foldy. But it doesn't matter if I know which foldy it is, because I can always go back to the floor and try again and make sure. It's always better to check and make sure you're in the right space if you have any doubt about your right spaceness, rather than just going forward without care, because if you just go forward without care, you'll wind up with something nuts. All right. Handy dandy little fold number 2. Match it up with other fold. Do exactly the same thing. Make sure that I haven't suddenly switched directions and now I have seams on the wrong side. Although, as we'll get to that later, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of stuff I'm going to tell you really doesn't matter because you can fix it without tearing everything out, especially when you're flat felling seams. And we're going to flat fell everything because it's linen. All right. Are there questions out there? Yes, measure twice, cut once. Definitely. All right, so I have my first seams in here. I need to flat fell them. So one of my bodies is on the selvage. It's always easier to fold over the selvage than cut it. So I'm going to trim my sleeves. And when you flat fell, you trim a little bit off the inside. So I'll get this up a little bit further. I am trimming off of the piece of fabric that's going to wind up on the inside of my flat fell. And I'm trimming it not terribly close because it's linen and linen frays, but probably between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch. And it doesn't have to be nice and pretty and even. No one cares. It's going on the inside. If it's wavy, it's wavy. The only way anyone will ever know is they're going to tear open your seam and look at it. And if they do that, you should slap them. All right, so now that I have trimmed it, it is trimmed, I'm going to fold it. And I fold it over so that now when I fold it flat, and this is why it's called flat fell, I fold it completely flat, and this is so hard to see on white linen, white on white. My inside trim is here. I fold my outside over it and I push it down, and then I have completely flat seam. Nothing is sticking up anywhere, and I'm going to sew that down. Do you have questions about that? Because I also have a picture.
What is your preferred method? Because obviously if you look at it, it won't look hand sewn, right? Because you're going to do it on your machine or else it wouldn't be done in 45 minutes, correct?
Correct.
So this seam will show. Is there anything in particular that you do to make this not look janky?
So for one thing, it's underwear.
Good call. I mean, just checking.
Yeah. To not look completely janky, I try to sew that top stitch seam relatively straight. Like I said, I hate pins. I tend to, when I do this on the machine, I tend to do it kind of both fast and slow at the same time. And so like right now I'm fingering it down and getting that fold in. I will spread it wide so the sleeve and the body are apart. So that seam, like if I was a really good seamstress, I would iron it flat. Or if I cared desperately, or we were going, if I wasn't going quick, I would iron it flat and iron it down and iron the flat fell in and sew it down from the opposite side so that it would look a little bit less janky. A lot of the times I'll do the flat fill and the finish by hand if it's a seam that anyone will ever see at any point. So sometimes I will leave. So here's the super sneaky Laurel trick. If I need to put something together really quick and I'm going to come back later and flat fill, I will fold it over. If I'm being super sneaky, I'll get a little tiny strip of iron down and iron it down so that I can go on and do the other seams, because I don't want to do any other seams until this one is for the length of the actual seam, not the ends that I did not sew down. I want it finished. But there are times when I do go back and finish the seams later. If I'm doing something and I want it to be super cool. And it looks like I'm having a few tension issues, so this may well wind up being taken apart and put back together again anyway. Of our viewers, does anyone want me to actually flat fill this now, or do you want me to go on to the horror, which is gussets?
Flat fell it by hand right now.
Best of luck with that.
What is the salvage?
Oh, good question.
Term I'm not familiar with.
So the selvage is the edge of the fabric when it comes off the bolt, and the selvage is woven in. So on linen, this has a little tiny brown strip right here, but the ends are looped over and woven in. So
Are you covering your mouth?
Yes, I'm covering my mouth. So this bit from there to there is sort of double strung. It's got twice as many strings in it.
It's double strung, and I'm not sure what the context was, but basically when your warp thread that goes, or sorry, your weft thread that goes from left to right on the pattern, it goes, sorry, this is a video thing. It goes to the side and out the side and then turns around and comes back in. There's no way for those threads to unravel. So the selvage is always a good spot that you don't need to protect, whereas any other spot will be happy to unravel.
And I have been known to have my sleeves set up when I'm being super sneaky. And I know exactly how long I want my sleeves to be because this is the 14th shift I've made this week. I have been known to make my cuffs the selvage so I don't have to hem them.
Thank you.
All right, so with the exception of my apprentice, who we're not talking to anymore, no one wants to see me flat fell, so I'm not going to finish my seams. I will finish all my seams later because it's totally possible to do. And we're going to start on the horror, which are gussets. So I talk about the gussets in no friendly terms because they can be a royal pain. They shouldn't be as hard as they always wind up being, but I mean, that's okay. So I have an almost visible gusset. You can see I have a seam that goes from here to here and here to here and here to back there and then back up here. Gussets are armpits. Gussets, for people who have more boob than I do, gussets make boobs work. Gussets make it so you can move your arm up and down, because without a gusset, you can't move your arm. In the gusset pattern didn't, just like the basic smock pattern didn't change for 1,000 years, the gusset didn't change for about 1,000 years. There's that little weird 13th, 14th century time when they actually put curves in clothes. But other than that, no, gussets, all about them. And they tend to be squares. So in all of the documentation that I could find on Elizabethan smocks, all of the gussets are squares. There is one case where they are triangles, and they are actually included in the sleeve. Actually, no, they're included in the body. It looks ridiculous because you've got this rectangle with these triangles hanging off of it. That's also the only time I found triangular gussets. All the rest of them are squares. Having made tea tunics for people with gussets, I have found that some gussets wind up being some really crazy other shapes when you make them for outer clothing. This is inner clothing. They're gonna poof out and back. It's how it is. It's okay. Don't worry about it. It's underwear. So your gussets should be, even if you believe that you require no gussets whatsoever, you need at least a 3-inch square gusset. If you are mightily endowed by your creator, sometimes you still have, you should not have a gusset any larger than 6 inches, because then things just start getting really, really, really strange. One of my favorite things that they did in Period, someone must have been well endowed, and her gore went all the way up to the sleeve body junction that we just made, and we're about to put a gusset here. Her gores went all the way up to there, and then there was a gusset, and so she had gore edition plus gusset edition. So she got some even extra space in there. But so I will say again, there's lots of evidence for lots of different ways of doing gores. If someone tells you there's only one way to do gores or gussets, they're lying. People made clothes to fit their bodies, because we're not talking people who are just, making pet things by a pattern that someone sold like McCall's. That wasn't a thing. You'll notice I'm using a wonderful pattern right here. It's rectangles and it's in my brain. So look, I have a piece of fabric. And my piece of fabric is, it's 6 inches. I am a 6-inch gore girl. I don't need 6-inch gores, but I make 6-inch gores. I just like 6-inch gores. I like being able to move my arms around all the way around, all the way around. I like having space and not being constricted, even though my girdles are good and constricting. And oddly, the piece of fabric that is left over after I have cut out my body and my sleeves is 6 inches, because that's how wide the linen is. So this piece just exists because it exists. It's the length of my sleeves and the width of my gusset. So I guess it is dying to be a gusset. So I'm going to cut. So my gusset will not wind up being 6 inches. My gusset will wind up being closer to 4 inches in the end after wide seam allowances, but I'm going to cut them at 6-inch squares. Gussets! See, now, isn't that faster than actually using scissors?
Oh,
I think it's faster than actually using scissors.
It's terrifying though. Drawing a thread and getting a nice crisp line is better, I think.
Whose apprentice are you? All right, I have gussets. Rectangular construction is a good thing. I have a corner where my body and my sleeve come together. This lovely little corner. I have a corner of my gusset. They all go together. And this seems, honestly, this seems like magic. This seems like some sort of crazy, how in the world does this actually work? I promise it does. And occasionally you have to put a couple stitches in to sew up a little gap. You know, that's sewing. If we think about people in real life doing this by hand, they would have just gone around in a square. When we use a machine, it gets significantly trickier. So I have folded my body piece. So my body piece is folded at this seam with my sleeve. So it's folded back on itself. And when I do that, I can feel and see exactly where the seam ends between the body and the sleeve. And so I'm going to line my gusset up there with my sleeve, and I'm going to start my needle right at that spot, because the closer I start to that spot, the less gappage I'm going to have later, and the better the gusset is going to go in and the flatter it's going to go in. So I'm going to do that seam real quick. And I know, one, that this is the right size gusset. I know that this gusset is going in permanently and I'm not taking it back out later, so I am not basting. But if you're putting your first gusset in, use the largest stitch length that you've got, because you may require adjustment, and that's totally normal and just how this works. Allow for adjustment. It's okay. You can go back in later and stitch it with a smaller stitch. You don't want to leave that basting stitch forever, because your outfit will fall right off of you and it will be very embarrassing. However, if you're doing your first set of gussets, or maybe your second or third set of gussets, big stitches, patience, it will be okay, I promise. All right, now I have, where before I folded the body back, now I'm folding the sleeve back, and I am once again looking for that spot that is right where my gusset, my body and my sleeve come together, so that is the spot where I start. And now I'm sewing on the other side. So this is a little trickier. You can sew backwards. That's a creative solution to making this work. That pisses off my machine when I make it sew backwards for extended lengths. So for happiness with the machine that gets me through these things, I'm going to sew forwards, but again, I'm going to be really careful about where I start. So I am starting right at that spot, putting my needle in, and also making sure you never sew all the way to the end. Because you need that seam allowance for the next part. All right. I have a square sewn between my body and my sleeve. And now there's magic, because now I have to get this square sewn to that hole. So I have a hole right here, and I have to get this square into that hole without creating any infinite loops, except the one I want. So this open corner, this is the only free corner in my whole gusset. This corner has to go at the junction of the sleeve and the body. Now, I have done this wrong many, many times. About 10 years ago, I stopped doing it wrong, and I've made a lot of, because at that point I've made a whole lot of these things. But here is my not so secret. I turn the whole thing weird. So I have my sleeve, I have this whole thing like this. I'm gonna have to, it feels so much like this side here should go with this side here, but it doesn't. It goes with this side here and not the direction you think it should. So this corner has to go in this corner. And if I pretend that I'm starting from the very, very beginning and I put this corner just like I did put it in the other corner, so that I have my corner of my gusset right there at the point where my sleeve and my body come together, and I'm pretending, and I haven't done any sewing yet, and this is going to be great, and I'm just going to go and sew it in. And it's going to feel for all the world like I'm sewing it on the wrong side. And I don't know why it's like this, but it does. If I actually look, no, here is my extra gusset fabric. I am not sewing it on the wrong side. It just feels like I'm sewing it on the wrong side. I always start from the junction of the body and the sleeve because it just seems to work better for me when I do that. And if it doesn't go in right, it's okay. But just for fun, I'm gonna do this sleeve thing. It's gonna be okay. Even if it doesn't go in quite right, it's gonna be okay. It doesn't have to. When you do this second set of gusset, where remember how I folded everything back last time to make sure that I didn't sew it into the gusset seam, I'm doing that again, but now I have to do it at both ends because I don't want to accidentally sew my sleeve in or my body in. And you may recognize in my insanity that I may have done that once or twice. All right, one side down. Woot! One side to go. And so far, I have not very embarrassingly ruined a gusset in front of people, because we all know that that's the thing that is most likely to happen.
While recording, no less, for posterity.
While recording, no less. All right, so last side. All right, now let's look at it from the outside. There's a square, and it's pretty nice. It's pretty flat. It's not quite perfect. I didn't manage to completely sew the sleeve in or anything else, but I have a handy dandy square sewn in, and then it's got the rest of the sleeve is open. Kind of a nice Middle Eastern flair right there, but that's not what we're going for. The rest of the body is open. Again, nice little Middle Eastern flair right there, but not what we're going for. I am going to, because I figured this would happen, I'm going to not sew in the other gusset. And I'm going to go straight to figuring out where my head is. All right, so I fold everything back in half. I find those cute little folds I put in before. Fascinatingly, they're still there. I bring them together. I get this spot right here, and this is the middle, and I cut it. And this is where I always go bad. Every single time I go bad right here. I really don't want to cut a really big head hole right now. Like, I'm totally against a really big head hole right now. I want a very small head hole. I just want to be able to get my head through this thing. And I have a pretty big melon, so I know that having a pretty big melon, I need a pretty big hole. I also have learned that I don't want to cut any more than about 2 inches. So I'm going to cut about 2 inches in on each side, which is not big enough to get my head through. And I'm going to cut about 2 inches down on a side that I have just determined is probably going to be the front. I can change my mind if I only cut 2 inches. I'm going to need a bigger hole than that. So I'm going to cut 2 inches the other side too. It's okay. It will be okay. Still don't know if I can get my head through there. All right, time to strip. I'm putting it on because the next part works better with your body. Yeah, I was afraid of that. All right. Well, I know for certain that this is not the front. That is a sleeve. And I know for certain that if I just barely got my head through this thing, in the future, I'm gonna need more space for a larger neck hole. Doesn't matter how I feel about them. All right, so for the gores, I like sort of natural placement on gores. And if your smock is relatively well fitted, it's going to be reasonably tight, not tight, it should never ever be tight, but reasonably fitted up top, and mine is feeling pretty fitted. My gores or my gusset is feeling good. But you're gonna, like, if you pinch it together, there's gonna be a place where it's like, that is too tight. That is, I don't want it to be that tight. And if you go back up a little bit, that's where your gores want to be. For some people, it's their natural waist. For some people, it's their armpits. It just depends on your body where your gores want to be. For me, my gores want to be right here. So since my gores want to be right here, this is one of those rare instances where I'm actually going to use a pin. I have pins. They are my friends. And my seam ripper lives with my pins, so you know I have to use them occasionally because Lord knows I use the seam ripper. And without pinning both sides together, because that is bound to lead to tears, I pin and mark where I want my gores to be. And so again, there's no judgment on where you put your gores. Whether you put your gores in your armpits or whether you put your gores on your hips. Different bodies require gores in different places. Shall not judge. All right, taking it off. All right, putting on the other one because no one needs a naked Esabell. Shelly's looking at my belly button.
There's so many comments that no one is making right now. I'm really proud of us.
Well, I was told I'm not allowed to talk, so I'm definitely not making them.
It's because we're being recorded, Juliana. We're trying to be on our best behavior.
Why? I'm just saying.
Being on our best behavior for posterity's sake is always beneficial.
You're very good. All right, I think it's on forwards. Okay. Aren't you glad I'm wearing my workout clothes? So, ouch. Sweet. All right, so even though it felt like my gores were going in a mile from my armpit, my gores are only going in Let's put the pin on the other side so you can see it. 6 inches from my armpit. My gores are pretty close to my armpit. It's okay. And as I keep saying, where your gores go depends on your body. They just go where they go. And all right, where'd my book go? That's the wrong book. Someplace around here is the Patterns of Fashion #4, which actually has, and in the handout there actually is, and since I have that technology, here it is, and I shall share it with you. That is a gore going all the way up to the armpit. And that is a period extant example. So anyone tells me that gores can't go there, I'm like, but Janet Arnold says they can. She's got one. I'm not going to listen to anybody's gore arguments ever again. I may be a bad person. All right. So Chris is shopping for linen. So now I know where my gores go. And I know, because I already tested, how long this is. So I can measure from this pin to the end of my dress, and I will know how long I want my gores to be. And I want I'm measuring in centimeters. I want my gores to be 41 inches long. This is a long smock, and we know I like my smocks long. Part of liking my smocks long is that I like wide gores, because I have been tripped, I have been limited, I have been fallen down, and horror and embarrassment because my gores weren't wide enough and my skirt wasn't wide enough, and I set off at a solid trot, and first step my skirt said down I went. It's not pretty. So you may not be quite as hurdling hay bales in the middle of the Estrella Warfield as I may have been once upon a time. Definitely, you can have gores that will allow for hurdles. You just got to plan for it. I like a solid 2 foot wide at the bottom gore, because then I normally don't kill myself while going upstairs. Another trick you didn't think would happen, running across fields, hurdling hay bales. The extra 24 inches there at the bottom lets me do my thing without me actually killing myself, which is an important detail, and people like to make sure that I don't die. You guys have opinions on that. All right.
Some of us need you.
So my length is 41 inches and my width at the bottom is 24 inches. And these are triangles, and this should be a triangle that is not a right triangle. Right triangles don't go well. You need an isosceles triangle. If you really want an equilateral triangle that makes for some really big, really floofy gores, go for it. I'm not going quite there. I have more fabric. I know it's a shocker to everyone. And so I need, let's see, how wide is this? This is another thing that sometimes determines the width of my gores, is how wide is the piece of fabric I've got left. Where's the end? I found it. There's plenty. I am obviously not being too terribly worried about preserving fabric right now because I buy this stuff by the bolt. And if I cut a certain width now, as you saw, my gussets just came out of the extra width off of my arm. My gores tend to come just off of the extra width of my body. And here's how that works. I said that I wanted 24 inches at the base. This piece is 36 inches. And this piece is plenty long enough. So I'm going to have a piece, if I have a square that is 36 by 41, I can turn that into 2 gores. All right, it is 36 by 41. What do I do with the scissors? Can I just tear it? No, this one wants, oh, can I? Can I? No, it wants scissors. There we go. All right, I take my rectangle, I fold it in half. I'm gonna have one gore with a seam in it and one gore that doesn't. I also have a picture of this in my PowerPoint, so let me show you this picture. So hopefully you can see in the picture that I have a rectangle, and are you gonna do it? Oh, you're gonna do it that way. I love you. All right, and it has 2 rhomboids. One of them is a little bit wider than the other one, and that leads to, I'm gonna have a little bit more than 24 inches, but I don't mind having a gore that's a little wider than I had originally planned, because that just means I'm gonna be able to hurdle better. So I'm gonna take this distance because I'm gonna be going straight into a seam. This is gonna be a little over an inch, maybe inch and a half, 2 inch and a half will give me enough space for me to wrangle the flat fell later, because this flat fell tends to be one of the trickier ones. And this will be a little bit wider because I'm going to need a seam allowance to sew down. Can you see my mouse? Is my mouse pointing?
Yes.
Okay. So you're going to be putting a seam along here to create the other triangular, although actually rhomboid, gore. So to gore, I think I'm actually going to have to get in a flat place to do this, because I'm actually going to use scissors, because tearing on the diagonal is not a thing. And I'm even going to put down my measuring tape as a straight line. Although I have been known to just eyeball it and have it not come out horribly wrong, which, you know, we'll just call that a miracle of St. Esabell.
Fair.
Yeah, listening to it.
I'm cutting. I have to focus while cutting. Cats can get in the way. For some of you, children can get in the way. It's always important to focus when using scissors and not through them. Ever.
Turn the volume on this way down. I'm just curious.
Okay, so I have.
Elizabethan schmees.
So I'm just going to do a quick administrative item. We will not be able to go all the way to 6 o'clock. I'll need to step out like 10 minutes early, but I can also, I can't even make anybody your host because I need to host another meeting to get ready for court.
So that's cool because we're really on the last piece.
Good. I just wanted to make sure.
For Atlantean or
All right. So I have the gore that I don't have to sew together. It's the easy one. I have the gore that I have to sew together. It's the hard one because it's in 2 pieces right now. And I don't want it in 2 pieces. I need it in 1 piece. So I find the right angle. There will be a right angle on each of the pieces of this gore. These gores don't have right angles. I don't want right angles. So I need to put the right angles together and turn them into from 90 into 180 degrees. So I will sew that up and then we will put that gore in because that's the harder gore to deal with. And because this is going all the way down, I can actually, this is the first seam I've done this entire time that can go all the way to the bottom. All the rest of the seams I've done so far, I've left 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch undone because I'm going to have to do some interesting seam finishing techniques later. But this one where I'm going all the way to what's going to be the bottom hem, I can just finish that seam all the way down. My machine's starting to get linty. That's the one thing about sewing with linen. You got to sweep your machine.
What machine do you use?
I have a Bernina 1000 special that I bought when I graduated from college in 1992. So, in a perfect world, I would now finish this seam, but because this has to end, I'm going to be really lazy about it, and I'm only going to trim the end. I'm going to make sure it folds over good, and I can finish this later. My gore is way too wide at the top, and that's totally cool. I don't care if my gore is way too wide at the top. It doesn't matter. I keep saying it doesn't matter because there's so much in here that it doesn't matter. That if things are imperfect, they're imperfect, and it's totally okay. I'm gonna sew that little 6-inch section of side. I'm going to again make sure that my gore or that my gusset, I have no sleeve bits in there. It's just the front and the back, and I'm going to sew them together. So that I have a point to put my gusset or my gore into. So confusing. There's gussets, there's gores, all these things. And here's another thing. It's underwear. If somebody wants to really check up on you and make sure that your gores start at exactly the same place on both sides, they better be giving you something good. Because for starters, you're wearing your next to nothings.
So many comments that I'm gonna not make.
See, I love it. All right, so I have sewn that little section up, and now I have another one of these. I have another one of those places where I have two pieces of fabric that are sewn together and then they're not, and now I have to put another piece of fabric in there. And the piece of fabric I have to put in there is way wider, and that is okay. Make sure that all the outsides are on the outside and all the insides are on, well, okay, make sure that all the insides are on the outside. If you have any free flowing seam edges, they ought to be on the outside right now. Because we're flat felling, it really doesn't matter because you just flat fell it and no one can see anyway. I have one of my smocks that I can never tell which side is the inside and which side is the outside because it is so well felled. There's one place on the entire thing where I can figure out which is the outside and which is the inside. It's fabulous. I think Michelle made it for me.
I actually have another smock that's being freeform black worked for you. My first time. So no more counted black work.
Oh my goodness. I'm so excited. All right, you'll notice I'm using pins again. This is another place where it's a one of those for me, suck it up, you're gonna use a pin moment. I also have to fake, since I'm not actually doing my flat felling, I have to fake fell my gore because that moment of felling is about to get sewn in. So I will show you here. I have pinned the very center top of the gore to the very center top of where my body comes together. This is where that seam's going to start. And then I know it's not going to follow exactly, but I'm again going to use my fingers and be careful about it and feel down and just make sure, oh, look, they're not too far off, my end and but again, it doesn't matter. You're going to put a hem there. You're going to have to trim it down later anyway. Doesn't matter. I need to do a seam that is relatively straight and not too curved to get from here down to here. But if it has a little bit of a curve, doesn't matter. Gonna poof a little bit. It's underneath your skirts. If someone's looking at it, once again, you're in your naughty bits. So they better not be worrying about your seams. They better have better things to worry about. And you start, I do this backwards. Everyone tells me that I put my gores in upside down and I tell them that I don't care, it works. I start at that place where the body comes together. I start right here and I sew down. I know other people that start at the bottom and sew up, and every time I've tried it that way, I wound up with some sort of crazy tesseract going on and it doesn't work. So this way always works for me. If you've got it working the other way, God love you, good luck, keep going. All right, I'm gonna sew one side of this gore in so you can see what it looks like. And then we're gonna finish up the sleeve and I'm gonna tell you how to hem. Oh, the one thing I didn't mention, because we're putting this in right here like this, this can't be finished yet. You can't finish that body seam until after the gores are in because it will go horribly, horribly wrong. have to tell you that part of me is very proud of my machine. I literally have not had it out or sewn anything with it since I made the Mamma Mia costume.
Way to jinx it, lady. Jeez.
Well, we'll see if this ever gets actually done. All right. I may purposefully not do the neckline because that's the only thing that's going to be able to really tell the difference between this and a Viking. And the centerboard that I can put in later. All right, I got all the way to the bottom. It doesn't match perfectly. I don't care. We're gonna trim it and hem it anyway. It doesn't matter. Don't let it freak you out. I know I keep saying it doesn't matter and don't let it freak you out. That's because I've watched people get terribly, terribly freaked out by things that I'm like, it doesn't matter. Why are you freaking out? This is something that, you know, it'll all come out in the laundry. Who cares? Sort of like my lack of an ironing board. It's over there. I'll use it sometime. I won't talk. Another detail about the very, very top of the gores, a lot of people just do them by hand because getting that very, very top point in nicely is difficult. So sometimes it's just easier to leave that very, very top bit, and by very, very top bit, I'm talking 1/4 of an inch, open and do it by hand. But also, if it's not exactly pretty, it's underneath your clothes. Except for those one people, and we've already talked about how they should be caring about very different things if you're in your underwear. If you read the handout, there's notes about when I kick people.
I just walked in. There's notes about what?
He hasn't kicked me yet.
You know, I've done some research on apprentices in Period, and I think that she's actually really underbeating you.
There is that. I don't beat my apprentices nearly enough. It doesn't match. It doesn't matter.
Juliana, should I be concerned? Very concerned.
You have distance.
Okay, I have told you this. This is not news to you.
That is true. That is true.
All right. So I have this thing. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it is the inside of my gore, and I'm going to trim that and finish those seams. And then if we go and we look on the other side, we have the outside of my gore, and it's a little pockety, but I don't care. That will iron out pretty nice and flat. And that is mostly a testament to the fact that this isn't my first rodeo, and I've done these before. If your first one looks funky, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. They get better with practice. So now I have a happy gore. And the only thing that between this and being something that is, there's two things between this and being completely wearable, the other half and this sleeve. So I'm going to go to the very base of my gusset where my sleeve comes together, and I'm going to start there, and I'm going to sew to the end, and I'm going to taper it. Because I agree with Christy that having the sleeve be 15 inches wide at the wrist seems a little excessive. So I'm going to taper it down. And except for the fact that my machine stopped sewing in there. Bobbins. I wonder if that last gusset's all the way in.
Has everyone signed the attendance form that is planning to? Because I'm collating them now.
I couldn't sign them, so I entered it myself.
Perfect.
I didn't.
You will get auto credit for having taught.
Aw, that's so kind. All right, trying this again.
It is literally the least I can do.
I'll do this side because the thread's not right. It's tapered. Here's where my wrist is. And let's see, my hand goes through just fine. It's going to be a little tight. It's going to definitely be tighter than the ones I've got on right now. So if I decide I don't like it that tight, I can tear it out and move it out an inch. You'll notice I didn't even measure. I just said, I'm going to do this triangle. So I did that triangle, and that triangle got me a tapered sleeve. So the last thing is the neck. And again, in the handout and the PowerPoint, I have this handy dandy, I don't know what I just did. I have this handy dandy picture on how to do the head. I can, oh, for the love of monkeys. There it is. Oops, there's what I want. The actual head hole. So this is a lovely diagram that I stole from a lovely person on the internet, and it's attributed in the handout. Your head hole needs to be how big your head hole you want your head hole to be. I have smocks that are very sexy, and I just take my clothes off and they fall straight to the floor because my entire body goes through the neck hole. It's a little excessive. They can be really annoying. In fact, there's one of them that I only wear backwards now because if I wear it frontwards, the front goes all the way to my belly button, and that's just not cool. So I've started going with much more demure, higher necked, much like this cut, neck holes. It keeps the sun off the girls. I'm getting older. I don't want quite as much sun on my chest, and having a high neck. Some smocks had really high necks. Some had were very low cut. So this is again a place where you can find documentation for pretty much any shape you want. Square was very popular. People wearing French gowns would have a square neck. Again, exactly how you square your neck is how you square your neck. It's not like there's again a solid everyone always did it this way. There was no everyone always did it this way. So when you come to doing that, we already made a hole, and the center back, you can't see me pointing at the picture on my screen, the center back is going to be wherever it wound up being on whichever side you decide is the back. And that's going to be that very top point, and you are going to cut it around and cut it down a little further in the front if you want it cut down a little further in the front, cut it down square. Whatever hole you make, know that when you hem it, it's going to wind up feeling twice as large as it was when you cut it. Doesn't make any sense with geometry, but that's how it goes. So it's better to start with a small hole and make it bigger than to start with a big hole and be stuck. All right, that is everything that's super important. I believe I have 30 seconds before Shelly needs to switch off to the other thing.
You've even
If you
got
do make
a couple mitts.
if you do make your neck hole too large, one option to make it, if you do a square or I guess even a circle, is to embroider a separate band and then stitch it onto the edge of the existing neck hole, and you'll be able to make it smaller. And yeah,
It's a voice of experience.
Well, and if you look at Janet Arnold's patterns of fashion number 4, they basically had dickies that were the top from about bust up into mid back that they could switch out in the smocks, and they would have different embroidery and different colors.
What weight of linen do you use?
I use 3.5 ounce.
I'm sorry, what was that?
3.5.
3.5. Okay. Thank you.
Because most of my linen is the fabricstore.com 3.5 IL whatever 20. The William Booth 2.8 is glorious. It's glorious. It is lighter. It is a tight weave. It's just lovely stuff. It's 3 times as expensive, and I think I only have one thing made out of it, but it's glorious. And I haven't tried
a winter event. The thicker stuff is good because if you're using like the 4.5 ounce for like a cold weather event, it's actually going to keep you a little warm because it's a tighter weave and obviously a heavier, warp and weft. But don't do that for summer stuff. I did it and it sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, the 3.5 is really nice. It's just a general shift for everything. My shirts, my colored and cuffed things tend to run in the 4 to, I have one that's 6.1. So that next heavier weight. And my kirtles tend to run, the light kirtles are 6.5 and the heavy kirtles are 8.1. So I got more weights of linen.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Get the handout. The handout has both shopping resources and links and the books. Janet Arnold's Patterns of Fashion 4 is her underwear book. So a lot is based on that. There's some stuff in Tudor Tailor also. Drea Leeds Elizabethan Costuming page is a great one. And then really nice lady, can't remember her name, got her PhD in doing 16th and 17th century costuming, has a great blog where she kept track of a lot of her work as she was recreating actual pieces. All right, anybody else have questions?
Thank you for teaching.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank
I hope you learned something. Christy,
And